we saved it for the last minute to go, oh, maybe we should call a data vendor and see if we can subscribe to some of these data feeds, which was an absolutely deadly mistake.
Rachel Carpenter, thank you so much for being on my show. How are you?
I'm great. How are you doing? Thanks for having me.
Of course, it's great to have you. I'm very excited to hear about the story of Intrinio and going, I think, all the way back to 2012, right? I heard you on another podcast mention starting out in a pretty interesting way and going through the journey of understanding the different limitations and working in the financial services space and running a high-tech company. But let's go all the way to the beginning. Who is Rachel Carpenter and why start a high-tech venture?
Great question. Rachel Carpenter was actually originally a musical theater major, believe it or not, and ended up founding a data company, which is a wide swing. But I grew up in Wisconsin, and I went to University of Wisconsin-Madison, and I ended up getting dual degrees in finance and entrepreneurship. And part of what I went through in college was recognizing that I never wanted to work for somebody else ever again in my entire life. I had a pretty bad college level job. So I knew I wanted to be an entrepreneur. I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do yet. And so I met my co-founder while I was in college. He was a CPA and I was studying finance. So we had a lot of background in that space. And the original business concept that we decided to go after was actually an online valuation engine. So to do business valuations in a SaaS business model, we wanted to build a software online where to start, you would just kind of type in a ticker of any stock you were interested in, and it would tell you, it would run a valuation and then tell you, is this stock overvalued, undervalued? Is it a strong buy or sell? We wanted to kind of build this stock app, this investing tool. And so I came from a background that was not technical at all, but I'd always loved math and I kind of fell in love with finance because of that. And that's why I studied that. So part of what we went through was recognizing this is very complex. If we are going to build a stock app like this, we probably need to learn how to program to get it off the ground on our own. And so I took a year, and between my co-founder and I, we learned Ruby for the back end and some of the front end programming languages that we needed to get this thing built. And so I went through this journey of teaching myself how to program. I was sleeping on a couch. We were making no money. It was very uncomfortable. And we ended up building this thing. The problem was that we were illegally screen scraping data from 10,000 websites because
wait. So before we get into all this illegal fun stuff, that decision to go and teach yourself how to program, you and your co-founder, it's very unusual in the sense that a lot of the stories that I hear and that I meet are entrepreneurs. They might not even be coming from the tech background or the computer science background, but they have this great idea that could be a software solution, and then they go and they find people to build that for them, but they don't necessarily teach themselves how to code. I'm a coder myself, and I advocate for learning how to code. But tell me about that critical moment where you're deciding to take that whole year, a very expensive year, not just because you're not making any money, but because you want to get moving with your ideas, and you're choosing to teach yourself how to code.
Yeah, that's a great question, and I tend to honestly not recommend it in most cases. You know this, right? It takes a decade plus to really become a proficient engineer. And with most technology startups, you have a short window to really beat the competition and get your product off the ground. So you don't have time typically to do that. And in 9 out of 10 cases, I would say, don't learn how to program. Go find a technical co-founder, go find a team that can do it for you, because you would be surprised how long it takes to get really, really good. And I didn't get there, right? I got dangerous enough to get this thing together, but my CTO today still tells me, he's like, when I took over, there was just skeletons left and right underneath the rug with the kind of code that I was writing, because I wasn't classically trained and I only had a year under my belt. So I don't recommend it in most cases. I think in our case, what we were building was so iterative and we didn't know where we were going to end up with it. And it was so financially complex. Understanding how to do a discounted cash flow is hard enough with just financial knowledge. And then figuring out how to program that and turn it into an app is a whole different story. And so In rare cases, I think if the area that you're working in is super complex and requires domain expertise, it can make sense and you can actually move faster. In our case, like we would have literally had to have had a CPA over the shoulder of an engineer, and that doesn't work very smoothly. So there's unique cases like ours where it did make sense. The caveat there is that I had to give it up eventually. Once we got this thing to the point where we were moving, we hired engineers who had tons of experience and could really take it to the next level. So if you are in the 1 out of 10 where it makes sense to learn, you do have to recognize that you have to give it up eventually.
Right. Okay. So it's 2012, and now you're running this iterative business. You're figuring stuff out along the way, and you reach the first roadblock where you find that you're illegally scraping data online. So talk to me about that junction now.
Yeah. So any application you're going to build in the fintech space, the raw materials of that industry are data, right? I mean, everything runs off of data. We needed stock prices, financial statements, earnings estimates, economic data, comps. We need it for all the stocks in the universe of the United States. And so, you can go to places like Yahoo Finance or different companies like that to kind of scrape things down, but you can't publish a product that way because there's terms of service. And so we were kind of scraping for a while to get our prototype built, but when we really wanted to launch this thing publicly, we saved it for the last minute to go, oh, maybe we should call a data vendor and see if we can subscribe to some of these data feeds, which was an absolutely deadly mistake because the companies that we had to call were Bloomberg, Capital IQ, Thomson Reuters, these huge companies. And to put it in perspective, for the data that we needed to launch our app, it was going to cost anywhere between $60,000 and $70,000 a month to get started. So remember, I'm on a couch. I have no money. I've just spent this horrible year, dragging myself through the dirt trying to get started. It ended everything for us instantly. There are no economics that work out for a startup at that stage to raise money enough to support a $70,000 a month data expense. So we were pretty pissed off, to be honest. It was not a fun day.
So you find yourself with your co-founder. It's been a year of struggling and running this iterative business. You finally reach some sort of product that you're happy with, and you go to these data vendors. So what's next? Do you just give up? Do you pivot? Where do you go from there?
We got mad, which was a good place to be. And sometimes that can be the best start of something even better. We got really, really angry about all the time we had spent. And so the analogy that I use to describe this point in the journey is that we realized, do we want to be in the car business or do we want to be in the gas business? Because that's a big choice to make. We've recognized here, anybody that wants to build a car or a fintech app or some type of solution for financial services, they're going to need fuel. It's going to be data. But if it's that expensive and that restrictive for us to get our hands on it, maybe we've uncovered a much bigger problem here, an opportunity to kind of reinvent the supply chain of how those data feeds are made available. And so there was kind of two things that happened. We realized maybe we should think about data as a business instead, because we literally can't move forward unless we solve this problem. And then the second piece that came together for us was this thesis that is definitely becoming truer and truer every single year that we're on this journey, was that the future of financial services is very technical. Engineers are flooding Wall Street. Every bank is hiring a 19-year-old data scientist right now. Every hedge fund's becoming a quant fund. And that technical transformation of the industry is huge, but these data providers aren't prepared for it, right? If you want to consume financial data, most of these large data vendors don't even have SDKs. Like, they don't have software development kits for you. They have horrible documentation. Their developer tools are awful. But we knew that there were engineers and innovators out there that had ideas, just like us, for an app or a tool that could bring the industry forward. If we could find a way to make data more accessible to them with the tools they needed, we could serve that developer market really, really well, right at a time where it was about to, we thought, explode within financial services. And that's exactly what happened.
And so when are we in the timeline in terms of years? What are we talking about now?
So 2012 and 13, we were building the engine that we had to kill. And in 2013 was when we realized we couldn't afford the data. 2014 was the year that we really started thinking about data as a business and doing research and figuring out how we could start building our own data feeds. So 2014 and 2015, we were programming a lot. We were building our technology. We were getting our first couple of data feeds built. And then it wasn't until 2016 that we really launched publicly.
So all this time, 2014, 2015, you're still the coder, you're still the developer, iterating through understanding, okay, now let's pivot and go into a new business. Wow, that's pretty cool.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's very, very cool. So my next question was going to be, then now you're in 2016, what have you learned over those 4 years overall about the financial technology services world? So you mentioned the analogy to the cars and the fuels, and you can either be building the engine or you can be building the data that's fueling it. But for somebody that's not coming from the fintech space, what are some great insights that you have from there?
Yeah. So some things that we've learned is that you would be wildly surprised how far behind this industry is technologically. For example, Bloomberg is kind of the household name. Even if you're not in finance, you probably know what a Bloomberg terminal is, or you've heard of the company Bloomberg. That terminal is built on 14 million lines of Fortran. Fortran, which is a programming language that the oil industry stopped using 15 years ago. But this critical piece of infrastructure that's used by hundreds of thousands of traders all over the world is built on Fortran, right? I mean, that's just an example of how these big companies can't move quickly. Even if they wanted to compete with a company like us, it's the classic innovator's dilemma. And it's not even just in the data space. I mean, you can apply that to lending, you can apply that to consumer banking, to credit cards, to insurance, to any fintech vertical. It's the same thing. They all have their example of the Bloomberg Fortran issue. And it's this legacy infrastructure where the fintechs are coming in and trying to break that apart and modernize it. But it's not an easy task, because you're also talking about an industry where you've got a bunch of people who are really stuck in their ways. And so convincing them to use new technologies is not easy.
Right, and obviously it's not feasible to convert 14 million lines of code of Fortran to the equivalent of today's, Python and JavaScript or Ruby. It's that's a challenge on its own. So how do you go about doing that? So you're in 2016, you're starting to create these data streams yourself, and then we'll end by fast forwarding to 2020, where now you're allowing developers actually to play with this data. But what does that process look like?
So I'll tell you a story about the first data feed that we built, because it'll help you understand how we approach building our data products. One of the core values that's true to our company is automation, right? We're like, we'll never use humans to do any of this. Like, there has to be a way to automate it. And by having that foundation, it means we can spend more resources towards making great tools, and we can keep the prices down and make it accessible. The more we automate, the less money we have to spend on that, the more money we can divert in other ways. So the first data set that we ever looked at building was just financial statement data. And so you take, there's all these 10K reports that are filed at the SEC, but no two companies file their financial statements the same way. So if you just went to the SEC and tried to pull all that data down, Oracle might be reporting cloud computing revenues, hardware revenues, software revenues. The accountants over at Apple just put revenues. So there is no way to actually compare apples to apples between companies or even over time periods, because companies change their lines of business. And so there's this mess of data. It's in a language called XBRL, which is an offshoot of XML. And it's this really nerdy accounting programming language that not too many people know about, but we're experts in it, because we said, wow, there's got to be a way to use machine learning to clean that. And so what the large companies like Bloomberg do is they have 10,000 people overseas that are manually normalizing all of that data. We took my co-founder, who was a CPA, between the two of us, both had engineering skills, and programmed that CPA knowledge into an engine that learns from itself over time, gets smarter, and we take an algorithmic approach to cleaning all of that data. So with the two of us, our data feed number one, with the two of us, we were able to build that equity financial statement data feed with two people and an algorithm. And to this day, it's still the highest selling data set on our entire platform. And so that's been our approach, right? Where is the actual root source of this data? A lot of it's at the SEC and stock exchanges, different places like that. Can we go straight to the root? Can we clean it and pipe it through in a much more efficient way, as automated as we can, and build great developer tools around it? And so that's what we.
So what does that mean to build great developer tools around this data? So give me some ideas of where somebody like myself or any young entrepreneur who could be using this data to create some meaningful products.
Yeah, so we've got a sandbox environment. We can get you API keys within 30 seconds, which is pretty unprecedented. If you go talk to any of the large vendors, they're not going to be that fast. So we'll get you API keys, we'll get you sandbox access. You can use software development kits in over 6 different major languages. We've got test environments. We've got Jupyter notebooks that you can pop open and start playing around with the data, widgets that you can test out with, just tons of tools, chat support 7 days a week. We just make it easy. And I think a huge reason for our success is that our company was built by developers for developers. So we actually understand we were trying to build our own app, right? We know exactly what it takes to get off the ground. And what's interesting is a lot of these large vendors that we compete against have a major conflict of interest. They're terrified of people like you and me because they know we could build a better app than them. And so if they open up those APIs and those raw data streams, might somebody maybe build a better Bloomberg terminal? So what they do is they slap these restrictions on. That's why we got quoted as much as we did. Anytime an engineer comes to them and says, I want a raw API data feed, they're not in a position to do it because it could cannibalize a whole part of their revenue stream. So we've taken a stance of saying, we want you to build something cool with this data. We're never going to be in the analytics or app building space. We're just the plumbers. And our goal is to get the data into the hands of these innovators as fast as we can so they can build awesome stuff with it.
No, that makes perfect sense. But I have to ask, so you're 8 years into this journey, coming from a very different background than a tech background, but why stick to financial services? What is it about this industry that ticked you in some way that you said, okay, I'm going to solve this no matter what, even if it's going to take 4 years of bootstrapping and writing code myself?
You know, there's kind of 2 answers to that. The first is just what I went through, right? A year of my life. I'm angry, right? And I'm like, there has to be a better way to fix this. If, I want to solve this problem for other people. And I'm pissed off that I learned the hard way, hopefully for everybody else, so they don't have to learn that way. So that personal attachment to just that time that I spent, like, don't get me wrong, there's lessons there. I'm glad I went through that experience, but it shouldn't have had to be that way. Those resources should have been available to me. And so there's that personal story of what I went through. And then also just the pure excitement of watching our data come alive inside of some really cool stuff. I mean, our clients are building chatbots, AI investing platforms. They're building their own trading terminals, risk analytics software, mobile apps for investing. Some hedge funds we can't even see what they're doing with to do some, deep learning models. There's awesome stuff, and we get to be the fuel behind that. And so we just get to see the little phrase "powered by Intrinio" at the bottom of this next generation of apps. And so we get to feel like we're a driving force behind changing an industry that's really far behind technologically. So it's fun.
So you are the fuel. So you are the fuel to this whole new 21st century generation of tools that allow others to build apps based on this data, right? So anybody who wants to build a chatbot or any AI machine that allows me to invest better or get more information, you're supplying that information, because otherwise it would be very restrictive through the Bloomberg terminal or the likes of the giants, right? That's the basic premise here.
Exactly. You nailed it. Welcome to the sales team. You're hired.
Very, very cool. So now it's 2020. One of the things that we mentioned right before starting this is that you are now getting this out there to as many developers as possible. You've partnered with Stanford to provide Stanford students with the data to play around with, right? And that's definitely something that I'm excited to look at myself. But what is sort of the vision for this in the long run besides just licensing the data?
Yeah, we want to be the number one go-to data provider for anybody doing something innovative in financial services. Sometimes that is big companies, right? We have some huge hedge funds and institutions that have projects or tools they're building, but it's more fun when we're selling to the guys on the couch that are building something cool. So we're expanding constantly the types of data that we provide in multiple different directions, right? So we're going deeper, which means what else at the SEC can we extract? Can we extract risk factors? Can we go get different types of data? How can we go deeper here in the United States to deliver more US-based data feeds? And then there's broad, right? Which is, can we go to different countries? These financial filings are everywhere in the world. Most of them are digitized and structured and publicly available. So where can we take this tech that we've built, apply it, and have a global set of fundamentals and other types of data? We have global pricing data, but the fundamentals and the financial statements is something we'd like to expand on. So we're going deeper in the United States with different types of US data. We're going broader internationally with data. And then we're also starting to branch a little bit outside of the quantitative into the qualitative. So obviously there's been a lot of advancements in natural language processing over the past 2 years, GPT-3 coming out. We have a lot of demand from our customers who say, you're giving us all these great data points that are quantitative, but could you give us some qualitative information? Could you help us search through the filings and get other information that way? And so that's kind of where our R&D efforts are focused right now, is how can we start to reimagine? Maybe we don't just have to be a quantitative data provider. Maybe we can start delivering some intelligence to our clients that is qualitative as well. So those are some of the areas that we're exploring and where we're headed next.
That's very, very cool. So if you could go back now to 2012 and talk to Rachel back then, who's still bootstrapping through that first iteration of building this engine, what are some high level things that you would tell her from the experiences that you've gained over the last 8 years?
That's a tough one, because I could write a book about the mistakes that I've made. I'm keeping track of them, and I might do that one day. But I learned from all of them. I'm happy that we took the path that we did. It took those early pivots for us. It took us solving a bad problem to find a better problem to solve. So I wouldn't change anything, but I think just to give myself a little reassurance to say, I always use the phrase, the roller coaster goes back up again. There are so many times when the roller coaster goes down, and it can feel like it's time to quit, pack up the bags, go get a nice job, have health insurance, different things like that. Right. And it can be easy. It can be easy to get down when the roller coaster goes down, but it always goes back up again. So that would be something I would reassure myself about, because there are definitely some challenging times early on. Yeah,
I love that. 20 minutes go by so fast, but it's so inspiring for me to always hear about these journeys, especially the 8-year journey. That's incredible. A lot of investors, when they look at a pre-seed or a seed company, they look at the founders and they're asking themselves, is this a founding team that I am able to see them going through an 8-year journey of roller coasters? And that's a very hard question to answer a lot of the time, especially today's generation, that we're so we keep changing our mind and moving from one place to another. So I think I'm getting a lot of inspiration from that. So Rachel, thank you for sharing that story with me and with everybody that's listening here. And I really appreciate you coming on. Before we finish, I have to ask you the most important question: 3 words that you would use to describe yourself.
Definitely feisty. I get told I'm feisty a lot. I'm definitely fast. I would say feisty and fast, and probably loud. I get loud a lot too. Kind of like a steam engine.
Feisty, fast, and loud. I love it. Rachel, thank you so much. This was really, really great. Best of luck with Intrinio. I look forward to trying and playing around with it myself and spreading it with the Stanford community. But it sounds like you're doing a great service to the fintech sector. I'm very excited to see where it goes.
Thank you so much for having me.